I interviewed 3 elementary school guidance counselors from different schools in 3 different school districts. The first counselor I interviewed is right out of grad school in her first year of school counseling, and the other 2 were a lot more veteran, both counseling for 10 plus years. As we spoke in all 3 interviews, there were many similarities and differences. We first spoke about their perceptions of their roles and functions each day. All 3 counselors see their roles as a blend of academic, social, and emotional support for students. They work with individuals, they work with small groups and classrooms while collaborating with teachers, parents, and administrators to foster student successes. Each counselor also emphasizes proactive approaches, such as teaching social emotional learning skills. However, one of the biggest differences I saw in their roles was that one of them specifically highlighted crisis intervention as a primary focus rather than the preventative being the focus, just because she tends to work with the older kids. And she felt like that was more beneficial for them rather than just working on the or the preventative things. So the other ones were more of the preventative measures, and she was more of the crisis intervention as it was happening. One counselor noted that many misconceptions exist about their roles, particularly the assumptions that they only handle crisis, where another emphasized the involvement in more broader cultural initiatives throughout the school. So next we spoke about the time spent in different roles. Each counselor seemed to divide their time among individual counseling, group sessions, classroom guidance, and administrative tasks. However, the actual percentage of time allocated to each responsibility varies. Some counselors dedicate more time to individual counseling, like 35% she kind of mentioned, while others spend more time on classroom guidance lessons or administrative duties. A common theme being the challenge of balancing these responsibilities within a limited time frame. So while 2 of them also expressed a strong desire to increase time for preventative programming, such as the LCL initiatives, one didn't mention it at all. And so just because she didn't mention it at all doesn't mean she hadn't thought about it. So next we discussed their involvement in collaborative teams and the use of data in decision making. All counselors actively participate in collaborative teams, such as student support and intervention teams. They engage with teachers, parents, administrators to address student needs and align counseling efforts with school-wide goals. While they also use data to guide their interventions, including academic performance, behavioral records, and attendance, they all use data to facilitate growth and measure things for performance, behavior, and attendance. Behavior and attendance data were more frequently mentioned as critical indicators of student needing support from each of all 3. Whereas they differed in the level of collaboration that varies due to these time constraints. So one of the counselors struggles to coordinate meetings due to busy schedules, relying more on emails and brief check-ins, while the others have more structured collaborative processes. And 2 of the counselors also seem to have access to more advanced data tracking tools, while the other expresses a need for better systems to streamline data collection and analysis. I also noticed how they apply these data. It differs. Some use it, 2 of them use it primarily for identifying struggling students, while another uses it to evaluate the effectiveness of certain interventions, which I feel like if they were to come together and talk to each other, they could figure that out together. Like they could probably use the data for all 3 things. So I also noticed that all the similarities, thing I noticed the most was the attitude of each of the counselors. as she spoke about her job. Each counselor was passionate about her job. They each expressed high levels of devotion and love, citing student progress, professional, personal growth as being a really rewarding aspect of their work. They see it in the students, and that in turn helps them grow professionally and helps them just kind of love it even more. However, even with the love of their job, they did also emphasize the emotional challenges that come with it. And all three of them said basically the same thing, that particularly working with students who have experienced trauma, that's really hard and it really pulls at your heart. And the workload management, as they're both being very, very major difficulties in this job, especially when they're the only counselor in the school. And one school only has 400, one has 1,000. And I can imagine that the school counselor, with the 1,000 students, she was the one that talked about how difficult that was to manage all of those students at one time. And so they are all implementing programs that combine proactive and reactive elements, with an emphasis on social emotional learning and early interventions, and following the ASCA national model to structure their programs. However, some of their programs rely more heavily on and are weighted more towards the proactive initiatives, while others dedicate more time to crisis response and individual counseling. Developmentally, programs are they also vary in how they tailor their lessons to differentiate age groups within the elementary school settings. Lower grades and the higher grades differ too. And I feel like that's good for us to be able to do that depending on the needs. One of my counselors came from a very high socioeconomic area with a lot of kids who had been kind of babied, and one is from a very rural area, just very different student populations. Each of them experiencing challenges such as time constraints, emotional strain, and varying levels of parental involvement, and they rely heavily on the support from colleagues. They all rely on the mentorship networks and shared strength across the board. They all rely on friendships and collaboration with other people. Two of the counselors did seem to have a stronger district-wide support system, and these were the counselors who had been around longer. While the other one, she feels a little more isolated in her role, and I feel like this has contributed to having a lack of experience or time in the district. So I also noticed the degree of parental involvement in counseling. These efforts also differ significantly across the schools, just based on where they're located and the parents at the schools. In regards to assessment, management, implementation, and evaluation, all counselors structure their programs based on the ASCA national model, ensuring that their services align with best practices and school-wide objectives. They each use a structured, proactive approach to their guidance programs, incorporating guidance lessons, classroom lessons, small group sessions, individual counseling, and prioritize social emotional learning, as I've said, as a preventative measure to help students develop coping skills before issues arise. And like I said, that's more in the lower grades, but also in the upper grades, they prioritize this as well, but also have the crisis intervention. One counselor did mention spending more time on individual counseling, like 35% more than other in classroom lessons, while another emphasized a more balanced contribution or distribution between the classroom's guidance and small group lessons. And I think I had mentioned that before. So the level of focus on different tasks varied depending on the school's needs. All three counselors use academic, behavioral, and attendance data to assess students' needs. They rely on these data points to identify trends, such as students struggling with anxiety or social issues, and they adjust their interventions accordingly. However, one counselor did express a need for a more streamlined tracking system, and I think I discussed that too, to analyze academic and emotional growth over time, whereas others seemed more comfortable with their current methods just because they're good, and others didn't really have that data in their district. All counselors emphasized the importance of collaboration with school staff and parents. They discussed how they participate in student support teams, intervention teams, parent conferences to ensure a holistic approach to student development. And while all counselors collaborate with teachers and parents, one counselor did mention difficulties in scheduling meetings due to time constraints, while another noted strong support within their district. So I feel like some districts, they incorporate that already, while others kind of make you do it on your own. It also seemed like each counselor struggles with balancing responsibilities. They all mentioned that they would like more time for preventative programs and individual counseling, but they are often pulled into crisis intervention or administrative duties. One counselor highlighted the challenge of being the only counselor in the school, like I had mentioned also, making managing students' needs overwhelming. It can just be too much for her, she said. Another counselor noted varying levels of parental involvement as the challenge, requiring them to adapt communication strategies accordingly, kind of making her feel like she had to tiptoe around some parents. They just are higher needs. They just feel like they can kind of run the school sometimes. And while all three counselors follow similar frameworks and strategies, differences arise based on their school environments. So as a teacher, I regularly interact with our school counselor. In fact, she was one of my interviews. Comparing her insights from the other interviews with my own experiences has been eye-opening. While I've always understood the importance of their role, these conversations deepened my appreciation for the complexity of their roles and responsibilities and the amount of work that they do. I knew it was a lot, but I didn't know exactly how much it was. And the positive attitude that they just have. They just love doing it, but it's also an emotional roller coaster sometimes. One of the most surprising facts of the interviews was how much time school counselors dedicate to the administrative tasks, which I had no idea. I kind of knew, but it's a lot. While I expected them to focus mostly on student interactions, I didn't realize how much documentation, data analysis, and meeting coordination is involved. The fact that one counselor expressed a need for better data tracking tools highlights an area that many teachers may not recognize as a major part of their job, and others may take advantage of the fact that they have such good data tools. Another unexpected thing that I didn't know was how much time they could spend on preventative programs like social emotional learning. As a teacher, I see social emotional learning as part of the classroom environment. But I now realize that counselors also play a significant role in developing and delivering these lessons. The fact that they struggle to find time for this due to crisis interventions and administrative duties is very concerning, as proactive approaches could prevent many behavioral issues that we see in the future. One of the challenges that stood out was time constraints. Counselors, much like teachers, are pulled in many different directions. Their ability to meet with students individually is often limited, and this can impact how quickly we as teachers receive support for students who may be struggling emotionally and behaviorally. Additionally, one counselor noted that difficulty in scheduling meetings with teachers and administrators due to conflicting schedules is something that I have also personally experienced. And at times, getting timely support or coordinating interventions can be difficult because everyone is balancing these demanding workloads. And you're just kind of thinking about what your problem is at the time and not thinking about the schedules and things of other people. So something else that I had not thought of is the varying levels of parental involvement. So as a teacher, I often see this in academics, but I hadn't fully considered how it affects a counselor's ability to implement long-term support plans. If parents are not engaged, it makes it harder to reinforce some of these strategies at home that counselors are implementing. And despite these differences in perspective, I see a strong alignment between counselors and teachers in terms of shared goals. We both want students to succeed academically, socially, and emotionally, and we rely on that collaboration to achieve that. The emphasis on data-driven decision-making is another similarity. Just as teachers track student progress to inform instruction, counselors analyze behavioral and attendance patterns to guide these interventions. The most significant takeaway from these interviews is the complexity and breadth of a school counselor's role. While I always understood that counselors support students emotionally and socially, I had not fully realized the extent to which they juggle individual counseling, classroom lessons, crisis intervention, collaboration with teachers, parents, and administrative tasks, and they are all within a limited time constraint. Counselors feel stretched thin and wish they had more time for proactive preventative programs like social emotional learning, and they're also having to deal with teachers complaining because they aren't getting to certain students in a certain amount of time, while they're also feeling like they're doing a million things at one time and having nothing to show for it. So I feel like this is particularly important because if students learn these coping strategies beforehand and they're learning these self-regulation skills early on, it could reduce the need for more intensive interventions later. But however, due to the high volume of immediate student needs and administrative duties, much of their time is spent reacting to the issues rather than preventing them. These interviews really highlighted the importance of collaboration between teachers and counselors. While both groups share the same goal in supporting student success, there are barriers such as scheduling conflicts, communication gaps, and differentiating priorities that sometimes make it difficult to work as a seamless team. Understanding these challenges has made me more aware of the need for intentional and structured communication between teachers and counselors to maximize student support. And ultimately, these conversations reinforced my respect for school counselors and the invaluable work that they do. But also, it's a little scary, like, can I do this? Thank you. I'm sorry for being so long-winded.